There is the professional discipline of history, and this professional discipline comes about in 19th century. Before that, you did not have professors of history. It was believed, they say, that men wrote history and women wrote novels. History is not causation. History is contextualization. That's very different from causation. Because, Lord Curzon, I know he's he's seen as the villain of Indian history and all that, but he's a very interesting character. He was very keen that these acts be passed in India for protection of monuments. Each time I tell myself that, Aparna, you have to be not doing the kinds of things that you do. Choose a simpler topic. Okay? For Andamans, I had to go to Andamans, right? For this topic, I had to go to Lahore. And then I'm like, next time I choose a topic, it'll be like something I can just sit at home and do. But it's a thing, I think it's a worm. It's an archival worm, once
It takes you places.
Yeah.
Welcome to India Unarchived, a podcast by the Archives of Contemporary India, Ashoka University. Today, we are honored to have with us Professor Aparna Vaidik, an author, a historian, and faculty at Ashoka University.
Professor Vaidik's work explores the intersection of history, memory, and storytelling, which challenges conventional narratives. She holds a doctorate from JNU.
Before academia, she is dedicated to making history accessible and more engaging, inspiring critical thinking about contemporary issues. We are excited to hear her insights today on memory, history, and identity.
Good evening, Professor Vaidik. I am Arushi Bhargav and this is
I'm Mumtaz Mehdi.
and we are Young India Fellows from the batch of 2025. We are very excited to have you here as our guest for the podcast India Unarchived by Archives of Contemporary India. Professor, today we are going to talk about history, memory, and any other interest that you might have.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah.
So, Professor, as an architectural student, I genuinely never thought of history being anything beyond materials, objects, or monuments. So, I would really want to understand what public memory and oral history is and how are they relevant in the context of today.
So, there is the professional discipline of history, and this professional discipline comes about in 19th century. Before that, you did not have professors of history, right? So, in mid 19th century, in Germany, for the first time, Leopold von Ranke is the first person to be appointed as a professor of history in Germany. So, and it's and it was believed, they say, that men wrote history and women wrote novels. Okay, so these were two conjoined disciplines, and that at some point they start, with greater professionalization of history, these disciplines actually part ways completely. They become their own thing. Yeah, fiction writing or novel writing becomes one thing, and history becomes one thing. So history comes to be associated with this idea of facts and evidence and all of that, which you may have learnt about. Yeah. Now, your question is about how important is public memory, and what was the other element?
Oral history.
Oral history. So, as history got professionalized, it became an engagement with the archive. Yeah, archive which was primarily textual. Yeah, and that is also a carryover of written cultures of modernity. That modernity is associated with the written word, and that got embedded in the archive, and the historian would use the archive to write history. Yeah, so the professional history initially was entirely about the archive and what was available in the archive, or written materials, any kind of written materials. Or other than that, you had this newly evolving discipline called archaeology, which would be looking at material objects. Yeah. So this idea that there is public memory and that is important to writing of history, or there is oral history, orality, which is important to writing history, sort of this idea begins to be very seriously considered especially in the context of African history. Yeah, because colonialism wiped out a lot of languages. And in some societies, there weren't these textual traditions. What we had was oral traditions. So how do you even write the history of those pasts? Yeah, so that's how oral history, and then it got also associated with women's history. It's because the texts were primarily written by men, and men who were elite and who were in power. So the sections of society who weren't elite and in power, their voices didn't get embedded in the archive. Right. So how do you write those stories then? How do you write those histories? So therefore, the oral history became gradually, as the discipline, became wider and began to think of, like, became bigger. These elements and these aspects and these stories which were not being told became important. So public memory became important also, and oral histories became very important. So they are a very important source for any historical writing. Yeah, but it's up to the historian. They may draw on it or they may not. So yeah.
Do you think, Professor, there is a certain tendency among historians as well as scholars to rely primarily on material objects to standard their historical information rather than focusing on, like as you said, oral history?
See, there has always been this tension in history writing, because I said, because the disciplinary foundation was, like, the foundational ideas are of the archive, and archive which is a written archive.
Yes.
So in some ways, oral traditions or oral histories have been suspect, so to say. Yeah, they are seen as not
Sidelined.
sidelined or not seen as reliable enough.
Not evidence. Enough, maybe.
Yeah. So I'll explain why.
Yes.
Because I don't want you to have the view that they're not authentic or reliable enough. So what happens when you go to an archive? The material is already there. Yeah, and then you go and access it. However, in many of these oral history is done, like, either you have oral interviews, yeah, which you yourself record, or there are oral traditions that you're mapping, or you listen to somebody else's oral interviews. Or so you will need some audio equipment for that, or you're looking at the transcripts of oral interviews. So these are the range of orality that we engage with. But what happens in this source, your own subjectivity is implicated, especially when you're interviewing. Like you're interviewing me at the moment. So my answers will depend on the kind of questions you ask.
Yes.
Right? If I were to just speak about history, I may say some other thing. So this entire, what we are doing at the moment is being determined by the questions that you're asking. So similarly, in oral history, when I'm going and asking, as a researcher going and asking a question, I am in some ways framing the conversation. I'm making possible certain kinds of conversation, others may not happen also. So that's what I'm saying about my subjectivity. My question is there already in the making of the source. So my subjectivity is there.
Yes.
Unlike a regular archive, which is a paper archive. That source is created without my thing. It's existing from before. So therefore, many historians see the oral material as suspect.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
That,
yes.
there is a presumption of objectivity in the paper archive because the paper is from before and it is already there without my having done anything about it to be there. But the oral source, say an interview I have done, it's come into being because I have gone and asked some questions.
Professor, just a follow-up question. I'm sorry if I'm not able to articulate it well enough. As you said, as you suggested, that archive is something which contains all the materials and it does not involve different people's perspectives and subjectivity in it. It has all of it, right? But sometimes there might be absence of certain material that have not been digged enough. And just because the absence of something does not mean that it did not happen at all. But while in oral history, you can dig up the questions, the perspective that you want to ponder about. But certain aspects are still left out, which you are not asking, as your subjective does not revolve around those concerns, and still something is left out. So how is it, like, how can we balance the histories from places like Africa when the subjectivity is revolved and concerned around certain understandings?
Okay, so just what I was trying to do was to tell you why oral history is seen as suspect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although it is not, in my opinion, it is not. But same argument can be made of the archive, that we presume the archive to be more objective and outside of our creation. But the point is, archives has also been created by someone.
Definitely.
So they will carry the subjectivity of the gaze of the one who has created the archive. So there is no source out there which is simply pure and outside of anybody's subjectivity. So the task of the historian is actually to explore how the material came to be. If this is the file in the government records, if this is the file there, then why is this file there and not any other file? What were the reasons that led to this source being available to us in the present and some other source not being available? So that's the point I was trying to make, that oral history is seen as suspect, but it is not.
Professor, history is often seen as, collection of facts. For many, it's just like, for many of it, for many of the friends, it's just like you are dealing with battles, wars, who won this battle and all of that. I would like to share my personal experience. When I was in my college, I always focused on Babur came to India in 1526. Battle of Panipat was fought in this year and all of that. But later in life, I just realized the more important question is, why did Babur come to India first? That would probably give answer to other raising questions, why the Battle of Panipat was fought and how was it fought and all of that. So I think we miss the basic contextual questions that might set stage for the larger things that we may want to point.
Yeah. So you see what you're saying, no? Even in the questions you are saying, what you're really talking about is causation,
Yeah.
Yes.
right? And that is also one of the sort of, I would say, old-fashioned political history kind of way of looking at the past, where we keep asking about causation.
Yes.
Like in school, if you have done up till 10th grade, you'll be like, what were the causes of First World War? Or was partition inevitable? Yeah. You get this. Yeah, yeah. So history is not causation. History is contextualization. That's very different from causation.
Yes.
Now, what is the problem with causation? What's the philosophical problem with causation? Causation, if you look, I'm looking for causes of Battle of Panipat, then I already know. So look at the philosophical setting. I already know Battle of Panipat has happened. Yeah. And I'm standing beyond Battle of Panipat, looking back at Battle of Panipat, and then finding some phenomenon and asking, why did this happen? And then moving further back in history. Yeah. So this is retrospective analysis.
Yes.
Yeah. But if I have to really analyze, contextualize it, I may have to make my journey towards the Battle of Panipat instead of making it backwards from it.
Yes.
Okay, what is the context in which something like this happened? Instead of simply looking for causation.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because then you are making links, like it's called retrospective. You already know, past is something we already know happened. We know that it happened. But if I were to ask, say, for partition, did people in 1944 know that partition is going to take place? In 47? Did people in 35 know that the partition? So if I'm going to look at history backwards, I'll start saying, acha, this link, that link, that link. Do you see why there is
There's
causation?
like a chain of linkages.
Yeah, and causation is, and that why causation is reductive.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a continuous thing of yes, paddling backwards.
Yes.
And that is what I'm calling the search for causation, this thing of origin and all that. It becomes reductive after a point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you are telling about a past that has already happened. So you're presuming that everything that is there is leading up to that point. And it may not.
Yes.
It may not.
Professor, do you remember the first archive that you visited? I also heard that you had a visit to Pakistan for your research. What was the experience like?
Okay, so the first archive that I've seen in my life is Center for South Asian Studies archive in Cambridge University. Because I was studying there and I was doing a thesis with Professor Christopher Bailey. And my thesis was on the history of conservation of monuments, how it started with Lord Curzon. So first time I went into an archive was, and it was a very modest archive at that time. So that's the archive I went into. But then after that, I went to London to see the British Library, where the entire Curzon collection is there. And then there was this great sort of part of the Romantic movement, this historical figure called William Morris. So Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings.
Yeah.
So I went to see their archive. So that was my initial. And then I came to India and went to National Archives of India. Yeah. So these were my very initial formative archival experiences, and I enjoyed them. And what really got me into this was the Curzon collection. Because, Lord Curzon, I know he's a much, like he's seen as the villain of in Indian history and all that, but he's a very interesting character.
Hmm.
He was an aristocrat himself, and he had several estates in England, which he was conserving. Yeah, so he was very keen that these acts be passed in India for protection of monuments.
Yes.
So, his entire, and he was he used to wear an iron brace. He had a bad back, and he would work, tirelessly. So he's also he's a very interesting figure, and all the materials, he was also very good with creating collections. So all the material that was submitted to British Library or to the India Office Library, he had catalogued it himself. So what I was receiving, like his collection out of his collection, was actually catalogued by him only. And then there was looking at this Delhi Darbar that he had organized, and he had read out a speech. So in the folio, the speech was folded up and kept there, and on that in pencil he had written, "This is a speech I held in my hands when during the Darbar." So for me, not only did I have the speech, but I also had a piece of his writing on that speech catalogued. And when I picked it up, I was like, who would have thought?
Yeah.
80, 90 years later, this young researcher would come, and I'm holding the same page that he held in his hand, as if he knew. So see, this is the thing of being this people who move history kind of thing. He knew that this would come in for historical research or something. See, he's preserving the past. And he's left behind with a little note for the young researcher who would come, or almost. So, as a historian, I found that fascinating. And also, he was so dedicated to the task. So, small story I'll tell you, then I'll tell you about the Lahore visit. Yeah?
Yeah.
So, when he finished his tenure in India, he was directly supposed to go back to England. But from India, he first went to Cairo. Yeah, because there was a lamp that used to hang in Taj Mahal, and that lamp had gotten broken. And such lamps were only being made in Cairo. So he first went to Cairo, bought the lamp with his own money, got it dispatched to India, and then he went back to England. So for me, that was a real fascinating story as a historian of somebody being that attached to the idea of preserving the past.
The other side of Curzon.
Yeah, which is less talked about, and which is
I don't know about it.
So for me also, as I went through the documents, I was like, this is an interesting chap. That there's he does lots of interesting things and all that. So that was a thing I did. So that I think doing that thesis, just sort of I wanted to do more research. So that's where my journey with, say, the archives began. So now coming to your thing of Lahore, again, so at some point I started looking at the revolutionaries. And I started looking at them in National Archives or looking at random stuff. And then I come upon this trial transcript. So of what is popularly known as Bhagat Singh's trial. Yeah, but it was not booked as such. It was known as State versus Sukhdev. So actually, it was Sukhdev's trial, like booked as that, but it came popularly to be known as Bhagat Singh's trial. So the proceedings of the court proceedings have been published in a volume. So I took out that volume. I'm looking through it. Then the first 2 pages was summarizing a part of the trial that had happened before the publication of that proceeding.
Yes.
So I was like, where is that? Is there a volume 1? So the archivist was like, this is what we have. Then I went to another library. There also this volume was only there. The documents for the first part, the earlier part from that date on, before that date, were not there. So I kept inquiring. Then it became a curious question for me. Why is that not there? Why only this is there? Yeah. So I think in asking those questions, then somebody said, you know what? Those records are there, but they have not been published and put together, and they're in Lahore. So, and I was like,
Have to go to
I have to go. This is a question I've been asking for so long. Yeah. And it is sheer, like curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. It's just sheer curiosity That's the thing of archive. It is such fun stories in it, no?
That you cross boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you travel and then you want to know. You're after a story and then imagine the heightened curiosity. This is a question I've been asking, and then I'm told, yes, this material exists.
It exists.
Yeah. So and it's also my hunch being proved right. Yeah. And this is like the gambling thing, na? This is what the big casinos do, right? They'll let you win a little bit in the beginning, and then you're caught. Then you will keep sitting, even if it's like you're losing money, you will keep sitting at the table, right? So a bit of that happened with me.
Yes.
I was ensnared, and then I'm like caught in the thing. So then I went to the archives there in Lahore, and I did find the records. So
Did you complete the story?
which story?
The one you had started of the revolutionaries, the trial.
So yeah. I found a lot of material, and my book Revolutionaries on Trial comes out of that and a lot of other material that I found. So yeah, that was So archives can take, and each time I tell myself that Aparna, you have to be not doing the kinds of things that you do. Choose a simpler topic. Okay, like for Andamans, I had to go to Andamans, right? For this topic, I had to go to Lahore. And then I'm like, next time, no, next time I choose a topic, it'll be like something I can just sit at home and do. But it's the thing, I think it's a worm. It's an archival worm, once you
takes you places.
Yeah. Yeah. And the gambler analogy is there. Once you've got something, now then if you
Going back.
yeah, there is no
Your intellect is at stake here.
Yeah, or just your curiosity. You want to know about those worlds, what happened. And yeah.
About the idea of buildings again, I think these days a lot of memory archives and subaltern museums are coming up these days. From an architectural perspective or a designer's perspective, do you know how they are designed, how they are curated, or would you want to do that sometime?
You mean memory archive?
Yes. Yes.
Partition museums.
Okay, that way, that way. So, I have been reading about this. It's called the Lesbian Archives. Yeah, made in the so these are set of queer women who at that time used the terminology of lesbian. Yeah, they began to archive their lives following the AIDS. The if one can say the AIDS epidemic or the AIDS when HIV they weren't any cures or like in the early stages of this sort of and many people died.
Yes.
So there were a set of people who felt that their lives would go undocumented or not written about, and so they began to archive themselves and archive their lives. So and this was not just for new histories to be written, but these were archives really for posterity, for remembrance. So these archives were embedded with a certain kind of an emotion. There was grief, there was mourning in these, yeah, in these archives, and there was also joy for people who survived.
Yes.
But there was also politics to this archiving, where they felt that not everybody can have an access to this archive and not everybody can run such an archive. So this archive was actually running out of somebody's drawing room for many years. The quest for them was to find a place once it overgrew the drawing room, and that there was joy also of building such an archive. And then they decided that it had to be a lesbian person who would run the archive also. Yeah. So so I see archives, especially memory archives and sort of marginal archives, as spaces. They can be spaces of resistance. They are spaces of affect and emotions. Yeah. And they're also spaces of perseverance of human spirit. And there is one in Bangalore called the Kamra Archives, QAMRA, Kamra Archives, which is basically a queer archive. Again, an archive which came together serendipitously, in the sense that people who are fighting cases related to Section 377. Yeah. So,
Homosexuality.
yeah. So, about that. So, their materials, the briefs that were prepared to fight those cases, then they were all brought together in a kamra which is a room also. Yeah. So that way. And then the archive room.
Public memory plays a huge role in how we remember history. Have you ever come across moments where what people remember might be very different from what the records actually show?
Yeah. Not only what records show, what the written history also shows. So I'll give you one example. Like, I was doing oral interviews in Andamans. And this was an old gent. I had gone to his house to interview him. And he kept telling me that Gandhiji had come to Andamans. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm getting my history wrong. That Gandhi went to Andamans. Maybe he did. This guy is saying it. And he said, when independence came, and he said in 45, in 45, in 40. So I was like, what happened in 45? When independence came? Azadi ke din, Azadi ke din. So I was like, wait a minute. Like 47 is when we became independent, right? India became independent. And he's saying 45. So he was saying two things which were completely contradicting the history that I knew, which is one, that Gandhi went to Andaman, and the thing is, India became free in 45. Now, the question for a historian is either you can discard that, dismiss that, and say, this guy is not thinking straight or doesn't know what he's talking about, or this version is incorrect.
Yeah.
That's one way to respond to that. Another is to ask why that version exists. What's happening there for him to be believing that Gandhi came?
And 1945 is the day of independence.
Yeah. So then I realized that he's actually talking about what is happening in his head is Subhash Chandra Bose and Gandhi there is a slippage, and they have the same specs. And there is such a preponderance of the Gandhian framework that in his mind there is a slippage happening. So Bose went to Andaman, Gandhi didn't. So he's instead of Bose, for some reason Gandhi is stuck in his head. Yeah. And in Andaman, actually the British had lost the islands during Second World War to the Japanese. And they recovered the islands in 45, and the Union Jack went up in 45 in Andamans.
That's how they remember.
And the Tiranga went up in 47. But for him, because the Japanese occupation was so onerous, the Japanese carried out a genocide in Andamans. They wiped out most of the male population on the islands. Yeah. So for them, the liberation was the British coming back to rescue and raising the Union Jack. Right?
Rather than Tiranga.
Yes. So, and that is because these are the people who were born on the islands. These are like local born, so to say, locally born people who were born during the British time on the island. So it was the world that they had always seen was the island being a British place, not even a colony. They're not even thinking like that sometimes, right? They could be thinking of it as a colony, but that's the world that they are living. And then that world gets wiped out and it's restored in 45. So I'm just giving you an example how to engage with popular memory.
You can't discard them totally.
I don't think we should. I think that's valuable. I would treat it as a primary source.
Yes.
Yeah, that there is something over here that is making these people believe a particular thing. And why is that?
If you could have a conversation with any historical character or a figure, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Okay, so before I answer it, I want to know who you would want to meet.
Okay, I would like to meet Ghalib and discuss history through his poetry.
You are very nice. And how about you?
I think I would like to meet Sir Joseph Paxton. Joseph Paxton was the guy who conceptualized the Crystal Palace, which led to the idea of, I am assuming, exhibitions for the current future. I would like to meet him.
And ask him what?
How did you come up with this idea? The Crystal Palace as a whole, the construction of it.
Yeah.
From my understanding, there aren't any very clear photographs from that time or any historical record of the plans. I would really want to understand how he accommodated so many exhibitions inside the Crystal Palace.
Yeah. And also to sort of imagine that kind of thing.
That kind of a structure at that time.
Yeah. Very interesting,
But
fascinating.
the question is still there. Who would you meet?
Yeah. So you see, like I worked on revolutionaries for very long. So I'm going to pick one of them who I really felt moved by. So, generally when people answer this question, they'll take the name of big leaders.
Yes.
Now, this person is big in my imagination for other reasons. Yeah. And his name is Jatin Das. And often people sort of mix up Jatin Das with Jatin Bagha. So there is another famous Bengali revolutionary who is known as Jatin Bagha. So this guy is Jatin Das, and Jatin Das actually went to Russia to learn how to make a bomb. Yeah. Now, the Indian revolutionaries, very quickly in Bengal, they realized that the guns and all guns, pistols and arms are not very easy to use because the gunpowder becomes wet.
Yes.
Sometimes the guns become jammed. Also, they were very expensive. So they felt we could make a lot more noise if we used bombs. Yeah, or we could get more done if we use bombs. But how do you make it? So some of them actually went to US and learn USSR and learn to make the bomb, right? Now the recipe of the bomb was not always written down because the police can capture it, right?
Yes.
So some people knew it and you learn it from them or they will pass it on, and that's the way it was being done, right? So when this Chandrasekhar Azad and Bhagat Singh's group, which was known as Hindustan Socialist Republican Army or Association, HSRA, so when HSRA needed a bomb maker, so Bhagat Singh then contacted these Bengal revolutionaries and came in touch with Jatin Das. Jatin Das came back to them with them and began to get the bomb done. And then they would recruit these students who were learning science. So some of the students who knew chemistry and all were recruited so that they know how to work with chemicals and all. So now why do I like Jatin Das? Now when you would have heard about the hunger strikes that these revolutionaries undertook. Now when the hunger strikes started, Jatin, after some time when the government, when the nationalist leaders would say, can you stop it now and we move on, like that. So the hunger strikes, they undertook, then stopped it after some time, then they again undertook and stopped it, like that. But Jatin Das was one who refused to stop. Oh. Yeah. And he had the most horrible death because of hunger. He developed gangrene and he died very slowly. So I found that courage remarkable. I was like, this guy is dying every day. And he got gangrene. First his toe went, then his leg went, his eyesight went. So, like in Hindi, you say na, til til ke marna. वो बहुत धीरे, it was a very slow, painful death. But that man didn't give up. And for me, that was, I used to get like, I still, when I'm telling you about him now, I get goosebumps.
Yes. Professor, as a closing question, I would like to know your thoughts about the collections in the Ashoka archives.
Yeah, so I can tell you about some of the collections that my students have used. And there is one collection that I appreciate its presence. So they have used Lakshmi Sehgal's collection, and it was very interesting that there is the material that they have used are letter exchange between Lakshmi Sehgal and one of the officers in the government, where she's asking for pension, and she has been denied the pension. So you have these small gems coming up. Then one student worked on Sai Paranjpe's collection and worked on a movie that did not release on AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that was also again very interesting. Then there is Girish Karnad's collection, and there are drawings and plays and scripts. So I feel that some of these individuals were very interesting people. Yeah, and then the Radhakrishnan collection, which is actually on display. Some of the material from it is display. So I had taken the students once there, and there were lots of letters that they're exchanging with foreign leaders and or Indian princely states or different. So just the letterheads, made for such a curious, such great archival objects because they have different logos on them.
Yes.
So it's like we can just do a history of logos, how these logos were transforming in post-colonial India and all that. So that's there. And another collection is that of Agay. Agay was this famous journalist and progressive writer, Hindi writer, and connected to my story of the revolutionaries because once he was also an outlier, but part of the HSRA.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a case after these guys had been hanged and all that. Some of these people got captured, and a case happened. They were embroiled in a case called the Delhi conspiracy case. So I wanted to look at the materials from that. Yeah, so I found out that Agay's material is here, and like he was involved in that case also, and he was acquitted. But the materials of that, because of his private papers, are here. And an interesting vignette is that Agay, when he worked in Nabhara Times, was my father worked with him, was a fellow journalist, and as a child I had heard stories about him. So it was very interesting for me to read like Akshay Mukul's book and also on Agay, and also to go to the archive and see some of that stuff. Yeah, so yeah, those are the like, and there are several other really great collections there. So, but the ones I have worked a little bit with are the ones I'm telling you about.
Memory and material coming together.
In the case of Agay, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Professor, for this conversation. It was
most welcome. Most welcome.
look forward to many such conversations in future. Thank you so much.